Hello, once again, listeners around the world, and welcome back to Mid-Table Crisis. We've been away. We'll be brutally honest. I know you've missed us, but we've had stuff on. I mean, Tom had to gallivant across the world. I had to gallivant all the way from Nuneaton to Leicester. You know, a whole 20-minute journey to move in. Obviously, I didn't have internet at that time. I had to go back to porn magazines. I kept waiting for them to buffer, but nothing happened. It was just bizarre. I couldn't get my head around it, but
That's what happens when you let Simon talk for too long. But yeah, hello and welcome to the long-awaited next episode of Mid-Table Crisis with me, Tom Patrick.
And me, Simon Cross.
A man who reads porno mags with people's faces on them. And, yeah, as you've heard, we've been on our travels a little bit, but we've been keeping our eye on the football, which is the important thing. We're supposed to know about this kind of stuff. And, I mean, we're in quite a good position at the moment because...
it's all done now, isn't it?
It's all done, dusted, fisted, caboodled, and, yeah, I mean, we can look back at it. And... caboodled. And, I mean, I personally, to dive straight in, I personally do remember, I was in Alabama at the time when I watched Manchester City clinch the title. It was,
I must admit that Man City are indeed our new champions of the Premier League, and me and Tom initially way back at the start of the calendar year, were rooting for Arsenal. Obviously, that didn't happen. They did the typical thing of falling away, but I think we can honestly say they're deserved champions, Manchester City.
Yeah, I'd say so. Chelsea definitely didn't. Man United were nowhere near. Liverpool, in the end, I think they're always going to struggle due to the problem with their defence. Skirtle was their only really good centre back. I like Daniel Agger, but he's had problems with injuries and so forth. And in general, I think they were a bit cavalier in their attitude. You've got to learn to defend. If Kevin Keagle's Newcastle learned anything, and they didn't, it was that you need to learn to defend. You can't just attack.
Oh no, certainly. But if you think about it, Liverpool were only 10 minutes away from winning the title. I mean, that was 2 goals in the last 10 minutes against Crystal Palace is what did for them.
That was ridiculous. I mean, 3-0 up. But I think the problem with that Liverpool team was they didn't know when to shut up shop. If you're 3-0 up and there's 20 minutes to go, you can be adventurous and look to get another goal. If it's 3-1, calm it down a little bit, slow it down a little bit, let those seconds tick down. 3-2, it was a disaster waiting to happen, wasn't it?
Well, there were always going to be issues like this. I mean, a lot of people pundits brought it up that Liverpool are a bit like an NBA team. They love attacking, but defence is a little to be desired. I mean, it's certainly what they've got to work on most during the summer months in terms of.
Aren't they owned by an American who also owns NBA teams as well?
Yeah, and a couple of baseball teams too.
He must like sports.
Who doesn't?
Funny.
Sports.
Sports! Sorry, Simon just sported in his own mouth. Yeah, I'd definitely agree with you that Man City deserved the title. And I'd probably put forward the case that Yaya Toure has been one of the best 3, if not the best player of the season, with 20 goals from midfield. Great all-round performances. He did have a few games where he looked to be going missing, but overall, I'd say it's between him and Suarez as to who gave the most value to their team.
True. At least Suarez doesn't mind if you forget his birthday, though. It's obvious by now what I'm talking about. He's kicked up a little bit of fuss. Man City gave him a couple of birthday cakes. Apparently that's not good enough. I mean, the man, they pay you 210k a week. They've acknowledged your birthday. What more do you want? But,
To be honest, his weekly wage would be a good birthday present to me. I would have no problem if someone gave me 200 grand.
Oh yeah, that'd do you for life. I mean, I don't know how many Icelandic schnapps you can buy with that, Tom, but it's quite a lot, let's say the least.
Enough to kill and earn, certainly. Yeah, and I mean, another thing we've got to look at is a lot of these comments actually came from the agent rather than Yaya Toure himself. And Yaya, in a series of bizarre tweets, he seemed to go back on himself. And then I think his agent must have had a word with him and said, no, clear it up and, I could get you a big deal here. Because his agent wants him to move. If he does move somewhere, the agent will probably get £1 or £2 million agent fee. And Yaya might get a big contract, or bigger than he's on even.
You've got to think about it. The man is 31. He has won every accolade he possibly can with Manchester City, if you think about it, because are they going to win the Champions League, especially with the financial fair play restrictions they've now got? It's incredibly unlikely. And when you're 31 years of age, and you're, let's face it, at your peak, or damn near just close past it, you've got to start thinking, I want that medal. Like, part of you thinks, I do want that medal, and how can I get it? And Yaya Toure can walk into another team that is capable of winning that medal, ultimately.
Yeah.
So, I don't know, call me a cynic, but I think there's an element of that going on here as well.
Definitely, I think the agent wants him to move, so he's making up some rubbish story, and he's basically pushing Yaya into making himself into a target, because teams are going to be sniffing around now. I mean, if you look at the tweets, they said something like, I think Yaya said, "Oh, I've got my card from Man City. It must have got lost in the post." And then he said something like, "Judge my commitment to the team by my performances." So clearly saying that he wanted to stay. He wanted to stay at Manchester City. He was clearly committed to them. And then about an hour later, he deleted the earlier tweets and said, "Everything that Dimitri says is true. He speaks for me." So in the time between the second and third tweets, I think his agent Dimitri, the Russian, got on the phone to him and basically said, "Look, if you just say that, what I've been saying is correct and that you are unhappy and that you might want to move, you're not actually that committed to Manchester City, then I can get you a nice big move." So I think that's got a lot to do with it.
True. I mean, we talked about Europe. Then obviously, his Yaya's ambitions for wanting to win the Champions League. Of course, with the top four being not marketed, different to the previous top four. We have to go through it, obviously. Liverpool were second. So they'll be back in the Champions League. They'll do fairly well. And we've got Chelsea once again, and Arsenal. If and when they do qualify, I mean they've done it enough years in a row now, so.
Mm-hmm.
So that's our top four, and of course Yaya is he'll most likely be in a Champions League team next year. Just which one? That's the problem. But,
yeah, I mean, I think PSG would be quite a good fit for him. They've got quite a bloated squad anyway. I mean, if you look at their midfielders, there's 2 world-class midfields there, let alone 1. So I wouldn't be surprised if they get him in.
True.
And on the form he's on at the moment, if he can keep that up, he would probably be a starting place in that team. And he could be part of what's missing at PSG. I think part of what's missing is team cohesion, but another part is a bit more defensive mindedness, which may be weird to say that Yaya Toure could bring that, considering he scored 20 goals. But he can play in a defensive role if he needs to. I think it was Mancini who put the reins on him a little bit more, and he was more of a ball winner. And then Pellegrini's given a bit more license to attack.
True.
At PSG, if he just keeps his attacking instincts at bay a little bit, I think it could be a vital piece in their jigsaw. I mean, he'll still get a few goals every season anyway, because he just does that. That's the kind of player he is.
He is Yaya Toure. But I think we've got a little off subject more. We don't want to make this whole show about Yaya Toure. We will not make it about the Premier League. But the fact remains, the reason we're talking about him so much is because he was an integral part of the title-winning team.
Yeah.
So that's why we have gone down this road. But we do have to consider there were 19 other teams in the league, obviously. We've mentioned some of the others that qualified for the Champions League briefly. The fair top four, because they were all title contenders, title leaders. They were all at some point.
Mm-hmm.
So we've got an accurate top four, I feel, this time round. And obviously, Europa League wise, we've got a really eclectic mix of. We've got Hull. Hull are in Europe. I never thought I'd ever get to say that. We've got Tottenham, and we've got
Manchester United, Everton.
It's Everton. It's not Manchester United. They didn't make it.
Yeah, of course they didn't.
Well, I spoke to a Man United fan who didn't even want it. He was actually quite happy that they didn't get it.
What, the Europa League or what?
The Europa League. He thought it was going to be a waste of time for them.
To be honest, I'd say the majority of Man United fans would say that. They wouldn't want it. Which is a shame because I do like the Europa League. I think it's a great competition for teams like Hull. But at the same time, I can see why the bigger teams maybe see it as an annoyance. I don't particularly think they should, but I can see why they would, if you get me.
No, I do. I mean, from next year, I believe the prize in the Europa League is automatic Champions League qualification. So maybe that will spark things up. I doubt it. I think a lot more needs to be done. I just don't like the fact it's group stage, then knockout. I think it should be a straight knockout contest because it was a lot more exciting.
A bit like the old Cup Winners' Cup.
Yeah. There was a bit more of an element of just drama and shock and suspense to it. You don't get that with group stage games.
No. You don't get the Lithuanian runners-up, getting through to the quarters anymore.
Lithuanian football's never been the same. It's never been the same since those dark days. But
certainly true.
It's true, and we briefly skimmed on Hull. We'll go back to Hull in a little while, for obvious reasons. But we'll go from the top of the Premier League to the bottom, and we lost. As usual, we lost 3 teams. We lost Cardiff, who, that was always pretty much going to happen after the whole Melky Mackay affair and the bizarre tactical decision Solskjaer made.
Yeah, I think the problem was that as soon as Mackay got sacked in the way that he was, he's treated very poorly by the manager. It didn't work out very well in the aftermath. I think no great manager was going to take that, so they had to take a chance on someone, and the chance hasn't paid off.
I think if he keeps with it, it will. Solskjaer's inexperience with a league like ours has played against him here, but I don't think he's bad overall. I think he's got some interesting ideas. He just needs to refine them. Now,
I think he's a good. Well, he looks like a good manager. He looks like a good manager in Norway. But go
on. Well, that's the problem, though. Will he get the time to refine his ideas? Recent history suggests not.
Yeah, and it might not even be that he's not doing that badly as a manager. It might be that he says something wrong and gets the chop, which is always a possibility with Vincent Tan, as we saw.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's the thing. I remember it being said that nobody of note would take that job because why would a respected manager put his reputation on the line at a club that were probably going down? It would have been foolish for any manager to take that, apart from a young up-and-coming manager who wanted to make his name and had little to lose.
As Solskjaer did in this situation, in terms of the English market.
Yeah, compared to a lot of managers. But that was the problem for Cardiff, that they had to take a chance on somebody. They couldn't get an experienced, respected manager in because they wouldn't take it.
Exactly. And whereas at Fulham, you had too many managers in too short a space of time.
Yeah. Now, I was a bit of a fan of Meulenstein. He went after 90 days. Jol was first. But we've already covered his sacking and Meulenstein's appointment. And Magath, I think it was just too late for Magath. 5 games earlier, maybe would have got him a couple more points. I
I
don't
don't
know.
know. I think the desire had gone by then. By the time McGaff took charge, the heart wasn't just there anymore in the team. I think they were doomed already by the time McGaff took charge.
Yeah, but I'm saying if it was 5, if McGath had got in charge 5 games earlier, would that have made a difference?
True. Trouble is though, they signed the players that were signed in January was immediately discarded by the new manager because it didn't fit into his system. But you've got to use the tools you've got. I mean, they had Kostas Petroglu. I mean, he was a bit injury prone. I wasn't entirely sure if he was fit all the time. But you've got a £12 million striker you've just signed, and yet you're playing a kid from the reserves over him. Now, you may have different assertions over what a fit player is compared to the previous manager, but you've got to use the tools you have in the situation you're in.
Yeah, letting Berbatov go out on loan as well was an odd one, but I suppose when you're in a bit of a hole, he's not going to be the one to dig you out of it. So I can see.
I think he's freed up the wages more than anything, Berbatov.
Definitely. I mean, what I would say about Mitroglou as well, you called him a £12 million player. He's probably not a £12 million player, but Fulham were desperate and needed to get someone in, and he had been scoring goals for fun. So
I was about to say, Tom, it's supply and demand of the transfer market, as we all well know.
Yeah, very much so. You know, he's probably worth just over half of that, but you know he's probably doing quite well out of it, and Fulham haven't. So
well, that's the problem. How much is a player worth? Because ultimately, the selling party gets to set his value, whether you like it or not. His worth doesn't really come into it. It's the value of the selling party sees him at. In most cases, where there aren't like minimum free release clauses and what have you.
To be honest, I thought the whole Mitroglou, I wasn't going to call it a saga, but it was a bit ridiculous how
episode.
You know,
that's like a version of a saga. Episode.
Yeah. I mean, how many games did he play? 1 or 2. You know, I don't think he completed 90 minutes. Certainly, you know, he was restricted to little substitute cameos. You know, and that was supposed to be the man that was keeping them up. It was ridiculous. I mean, it's just one of a long list of reasons that Fulham went down, and I was sad to see it because I do like Fulham. But I mean, they weren't the same club as they were 2 or 3 years ago. They'd really, really sunk.
It shows one thing, that Al Fayed wasn't really that bad when you think about it in comparison.
No, and you know, I understand that Hodgson had to leave, but he clearly did a very good job there, and it also shows that chopping and changing managers isn't always a good idea.
That's always a risk.
Yeah, as you know, as seen in Norwich, the other team that went down. I don't think their new manager won a game. I mean, he had a very difficult run-in. Of course, you know you can't deny that they had one of the hardest run-ins possible. And
got a noble draw at Chelsea, to be fair.
Yeah, but it was a must-win game, so you know they're basically.
And yet neither team went for it.
Yeah, it was strange, but it was basically a stay of execution. Norwich were, you know, I don't know what they were doing for the last 10 games, and getting rid of their manager wasn't a good idea because they basically signed their own death warrant. There was no way they were going to stay up after that, to be honest. You know, even if morale was a bit shaky, you know, they weren't in great form, I wouldn't say it was a good idea to change it up and get someone in who's got no experience of managing at the top level. Because as we saw, I think he was in charge for 4, maybe 5 games, and they took 1 point from it.
Well, exactly. It's like they had the Solskjaer example already primed, that managers from other leagues sometimes do need a lengthy period of time to adapt to the English system. And certainly managers with no experience at the top level are going to need the same length of time to adapt. And it's short-sightedness because it stemmed from the start of the season where they signed no one but strikers like Van Wolfswinkel, Almanda, Hooper. They've thrown so much money at their offensive line that their front striking force, that defense was just all over the shop, and it wasn't until January they got Yobo in on loan, which was a coup. But
for Norwich,
it certainly didn't. It was so unbalanced the way they focused on their team that it was always going to be a problem if they didn't get any of those guys firing, and none of those guys got fired.
I mean, Van Wolfswinkel scored on the first day of the season. I don't think he scored again. I think he's only got one goal. And you were talking about their firepower up front. I think they scored one of the least in the league. They were absolutely terrible for scoring goals. And as you say, they weren't great at the back. So to be honest, I think they were lucky to get into the position they did. I think if it weren't for Chris Hughton, who, despite what some people might say, I think he's a half decent manager, I'd say they'd probably been relegated long ago if it weren't for him.
I've got the exact figures now, Tom. Mm-hmm. They scored the least goals in the Premier League this season with 28 in 38 games, and they had the third worst defence.
I think Fulham had the worst defence, didn't they?
They conceded 85 goals in 38 games, yes. But they scored at least 40, though. Norwich only scored 28.
Which says it already.
Exactly. It's ultimately not good enough, as is proven. And the worst part about these three teams going down, I suppose, is the fact that my bet for I guess now I can say it a little bit, maybe a gung-ho bet that Sunderland would go down obviously when the whole Canio situation got sacked. That didn't come to fruition, and because I like Gus Poyet, I suppose I can come to terms with it. I know a Sunderland fan or two as well, so it's always nice in that regard that at least they're happy as well. But ultimately, I am taken out of pocket, so well done to Sunderland. They've stayed up. I didn't think they would at the time, but Gus Poyet has proven just how good a coach he is by turning the situation around. I mean, there's a significant element of luck in it at some points, but that's true of any team in any league. Luck does play a factor.
Yeah, and I'm quite happy for Sunderland, to be honest. They were a little bit lucky. You can also say they were a little bit unfortunate to be in the position of being in the relegation zone in the first place, and it was good to see them drag themselves out of it because it's never nice to see a team relegated, but I really think Sunderland didn't deserve to be relegated. So good to see.
But it's one of those weird little things that some certain football fans have. Like, we know ultimately that three teams go down. We talk about it like, this team's in the zone, but when it actually happens, we're still a bit about it with certain teams. Certain teams, no. I mean, QPR love the fact that they went down, but that's my personal vendetta. I mean, some fans do have.
Yeah, I don't think anyone likes QPR these days because Redknapp's turning himself into a really unlikable character, even if you liked him in the first place. And they've got a lot of journeymen and basically just hired hands, a lot of very unlikable players. So I think a lot of people are hoping Derby win, which is not something you could say 99.
We should mention that the day of recording at the moment is the 22nd, so we're doing this 2 days before the playoff final as obviously part one of our saga, which is why we're not covering some other competitions because they're yet to finish, i.e. the Championship and the Champions League. So, but at the time of recording, we don't know who's gone up, but we are both hoping that it is Derby.
I'll cross my fingers there for the blind viewers out there. But,
well, so we've covered, I mean, I know we're called mid-table crisis and we've sort of neglected the mid-table in quite a path. But as I say, this isn't the sole part of our end of season review. We are doing several parts to it, and we may come back to mid-table Premier League teams later.
Yeah, you will hear from us again.
We do have to take a little wink at another competition, the oldest competition in the world, in terms of football, at least, the FA Cup, which, as we briefly skimmed over, the circumstances of which led Hull to become European League qualifiers. and it was a really it was a really entertaining final. I really enjoyed watching it, but I was a neutral. If I was a fan of either team, it would have been a. Oh, I don't know if I could have handled it, to be brutally honest, because
Yeah,
it was one of those.
I think Arsenal definitely needed it more, so it must have been terrible for them to see the team go down so quickly.
2-0 down in 8 minutes. Yeah,
Yeah,
it wasn't ideal. And the way they did it, typical Arsenal, just conceding set pieces.
such you'd think they'd learned, but I mean, they showed their character. They went out there, they knew what they had to do. They needed to get goals back, and they needed to do it
There's
quickly.
so many. There were so many penalties. Well, at least 2 or 3 that they could have had or had arguable claims for a normal time, though.
Mm. I think in
So,
the end it was quite a fair result. Yeah, because I mean Giroud had a good penalty decision turned down, and you can't. There were to be honest, the officiating wasn't great. There were quite a few decisions on both sides that weren't given that probably should have been.
well, yeah, well, we could argue all day long about the official officiating, but as you say, the right team, well, the best team won ultimately. And Arsenal broke their trophy slump at long last. They have a trophy. Do you think this will change their mentality in any way? Do you reckon they'll be better title contenders because of the fact they've broken this slump?
Well, one thing to say is that the website since Arsenal last won a trophy crashed, which was nice to see. But I think,
Some of the tweets were quite entertaining.
yeah, I mean, a lot's changed since then. Simon used to be Simone. But I think maybe it might make a bit of a difference, but not a massive difference. I think the thing that make the biggest difference, if whether Arsenal win the league next year or not, is buying a defensive midfielder and a couple of big, rough, tough centre backs, which would probably help them no end, and probably a striker as well. So yeah, that would make a difference, definitely.
Well, as I say, we will cover transfers to a greater extent, more when the window opens, which we don't expect any real activity until after the World Cup.
Yeah.
Right after. So, but we mentioned that several times before in previous podcasts that Arsenal are a couple of players away. But I don't know. There's a mental aspect I think which has changed in some of the players now. Now that they know they can get across the line, it does affect you.
I'm sure it'll be a boost. But I still don't think it will be enough. There's still much more work to be done there.
True. On the other hand, though, as I said, I don't know. Well, it could go either way. Well, cup competitions are like that, though. Could go anyway. Ultimately, the league title, they're not the strongest team in the league. They're like the third or fourth. But who knows? Who knows what the transfer window holds? I mean, we'll speculate on it. We'll speculate like crazy, but there's no real action as of yet, so we can't even speculate on that yet.
No.
So that's most of the Premier League and the FA Cup covered. Well, I say covered in terms of results. In terms of hirings and firings, it's been there's one elephant in the room we haven't touched yet, and we've been waiting for the right time. We've kind of called it all season. We've made jokes about them all season, but all I'm going to push back the veil on this one. Manchester United, Tom. What exactly's happened there?
I don't think they were ready for Alex Ferguson to retire, and David Moyes took over. He had a massive job in his hands. I don't think he was up to it, and that's not a slight on him. I don't know if anyone in the world was up to it. It was the kind of you're replacing a manager that was one of a kind. Whether you like the man or not, he was one of the best managers ever. And having a mere mortal step into his shoes was never going to be a good idea. So I think basically it just all went a bit silly. Man United aren't used to not winning a lot. They're not used to not being in the top 4. So people started saying and doing some very strange and silly things, didn't they?
Well, as I say, it was one of those seasons where I don't think Moyes did badly. I just think the squad wasn't as good as everyone thought it was, even though it won the league last year. If you took Van Persie's lightning form away from that squad, was it that good? Answer: probably no. It's not. It's probably one of the weakest teams that's won the Premier League.
Yeah, and also you've got to think about, the players were there, but were they motivated? Did they respect the manager enough? And possibly no. I think if 15 games into the season things weren't going too well, and Moyes had Ferguson had put a rocket up their arse if he was manager, it would have made a bigger difference than if Moyes did it. So I think that was definitely a factor. There was just a lot of people talked about the loss of fear. Going to Old Trafford was no longer, we'll keep it tight and try and sort of nick a draw. It was every team in the league thought they'd have a chance. Every team
did have a chance. Some bloke broke mammoth slumps they'd had against United at Old Trafford and managed the job at long last. It's tough. Obviously, he was like the ideal one. It's pretty much confirmed now. I'm fairly sure it's confirmed now that Van Gaal is the new guy they're going to get in.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he's got a bit more pedigree about him. He's got a bit more status befitting a United manager, perhaps. But the thing is that Ferguson had the status of Moyes going in, but he left with the status of a world-class manager, and they've come to expect world-class management.
Yeah.
And there's a certain style or a way or a culture, perhaps, the most fitting word, that they've grown used to and just been so accustomed to, that this season's been a real culture shock. But they shouldn't forget that many major teams have had like this shock where they enter the wilderness for a period of time, but truly good teams, truly good clubs are always resurgent with it. Barcelona were out in the wilderness for quite some time in terms of like they were winning but not as many trophies as we've got accustomed to them winning, and they were playing second fiddle in La Liga for quite a period of time, but they rebuilt, they came back. Form is temporary, class is permanent. I guess what I'm trying to say here. It doesn't apply to just players; it applies to teams as well.
Yeah, definitely. How much class Man United have got, I'm not sure, because they didn't show very much in their season this year. A lot of the fans were very critical of Moyes when I think it wasn't fair. I think the directors could have handled things a little bit better. I'm not sure if there was much point in sacking him with 4 games to go. It wouldn't have made any difference, really. I think there was a clause in his contract that said they could basically sack him for a very little compensation comparatively if they didn't get into Europe in their first season. So I think it was the 2-0 loss to Everton that confirmed he would be going, that Manchester United wouldn't be in the Champions League, and he was sacked after that. The last 4 games were fairly immaterial. I think there would have been no harm done if Moyes had just stayed on for the last few. There were a couple of easy wins in there, and if you wanted to get rid of him then.
Oh, I don't know, actually. I get your point that it would have been nice to just nice clean break at the end of the season, but at this time of year, especially as we've seen, there's a lot of speculation and a lot of hot seats at the moment. If you're Man United, you want to make an early move to try and end the speculation. I mean, let's face it, we've entered the start of the end season now, and we pretty much we're guaranteed to know who that next manager is. Whereas if they'd waited to the end of the season, we'd only start to be looking at names now, and there's a lot more free slots open. There's a lot more teams looking for managers. There's fewer managers available because some have found jobs. You want to get in early doors, really, sometimes.
I suppose, but I mean, when you're Man United, there's not going to be that many managers that you're actually going to want, and there's not going to be many managers that could even do that job. So it's a bit of it's a narrower field. But I do understand what you mean. it is the season for it, as one might say. Um, and yeah, I mean, I think Van Gaal is going to be a lot of fun because Van Gaal is a very good manager and b utterly mad. So yeah, next season is going to be a lot of fun.
It would be a madman. Well, sometimes you need to be able to things to take certain jobs, and Manchester is one of them. You need an element of assurance within yourself that only a slightly deranged can get.
Yeah, as long as you've got the skills to back it up, it's all right. Yeah.
But as I say, it's that's it. That is. It was it was the story that ran and ran and ran until it actually happened.
Yeah.
So.
From the first month, I'd say it was fairly. There were people calling for his head back then, which just goes to show how fickle some Man United fans can be. But I think
You never did on that one, do you? Not all United fans are those fickle fans.
I know not all of them are, but what I will say is the way a fair amount of their fans have conducted themselves has been ridiculous. How many other teams flew a plane over their ground saying, sack the manager?
True.
Childish.
Ridiculous requests from a lot of phones and what have you for plenty of other managers in the league too. So they're not unique in this situation.
One thing that I think has got a little bit lost in all the other stories this season. Ryan Giggs has retired. Ryan Giggs, legend of the game. Ryan Giggs, who has been playing in the Premier League from the start, and played before it existed. So I think we've all got to remember that, and perhaps shed a tear.
It's true. The last original has gone, and it just goes to show, like, think of all the things think of all the changes to the game that have seen, like he's seen this time. Arthur Wenger coming in and revolutionising the way that we think about nutrition in sportsmen and fitness, the evolution of tactics, the growth of foreigners in the game, the rise of transfer fees, the rise of contracts, more and more ridiculous demands from agents and what have you.
Yeah, when Ryan Giggs started playing, Swansea, Hull, and Fulham were third division teams. During the time he was playing, Manchester City were a League One team. I mean, it's a bit crazy.
God, I know there are some Man City fans that wouldn't have even known that they were a League One team at some point.
In a parallel universe, Ryan Wilson could have played for England and Manchester City, but as it was, Ryan Wilson changed his name to Giggs, quit the Manchester City youth team to go to Man United, and played for Wales rather than England. So that happens.
Exactly, it's one of those situations where it's ifs and buts. I mean, what if Ryan had declared for England? What would actually would have been better for it? Certainly, would it have been the missing piece in the puzzle? He's one of those individuals. It's like Paolo Maldini. He's one of those one club individuals, but because of his mystique, his aura, his ability, and the fact he never did do it anywhere else, there's always that wonderment of what could he have done in different teams. Like, how would Maldini have fitted into the English league, for example? Could Ryan have been on the international stage in an international tournament?
It's what people said about Matt Letizia. He was a player that was good enough to play for pretty much any team in the country, but he stayed at Southampton, and he became a legend there, but didn't win anything. I know Chelsea were interested in him for years. Chelsea, from the early 90s through to I think it was about the 2000s were interested in him. But at Southampton he had a team built around him, and he just stayed there and was quite happy.
It's like the question will inevitably end up asking about Messi. Could he have done it in another club team? Because ultimately I don't see him moving. I see him being another one club man.
Yeah.
We're asking the question now. We will continue to ask the question. Once you retire, it'll become even more pertinent. Would he have done it anywhere else? There's that sense of mystique.
Yeah, definitely. One man that you can't say that about, by the way, is Craig Bellamy, who's announced his retirement, which makes me rather happy because I always thought he was a rather horrible human being.
I knew you'd sneak in a Craig Bellamy story in there somewhere.
Yeah. Well, he wasn't very complimentary to Coventry. And he wasn't very complimentary to Alan Shearer either. He attacks people with golf clubs. He just seems like a short-tempered person.
And it's on this note, before we let Tom get on to a personal vendetta about Craig Bellamy, at this point we should bring, it's not an end, because let's face it, this is the first part of at least 3-part special that we're doing at the end of the season.
I think we'll call it an interlude.
An interlude?
Yeah, an intermission, if you like.
Exactly. As I say, we're always into something, but that's not the point. The point is, it's the end for now, but you'll hear the second part of us almost immediately, because let's face it, we probably recorded it and edited it by the time the first part comes out. So, you'll be able to click that link straight away, most likely, and if not, then soon enough, it'll be there. You impatient bastards. More to the point, we're actually leaving for now. My name is Simon Cross. It will continue to be so forever and always. His name is...
I was thinking he was going to change his name by default. I'm Tom Patrick. Thank you very much for listening, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.